Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I want you to meet my morning stars, get that morning tea, if you will. That's right. We have a great conversation, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and it will also give you the opportunity to put faces to all of these names and all this wonderful information that everyone is bringing to you. So please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and click the bell so that you can be notified whenever we come up live. The Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and the Santita Jackson and Friends, Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page, Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page, and I'm on X. I guess that's what everyone calls it. I still want to call it Twitter. But the Santita J is my handle. So please meet me over there and at Santita J Show. So I've given you all that information. And you can also, if you are online, go to am950radio.com. am950radio.com. And on the heels of Super Tuesday, shout out to the people of Minnesota. Boy, you showed up and showed out. Almost 20% of you voted uncommitted. Wow. I mean, this is a movement. It's taking off. It's taken off. Although in Illinois, we don't have the option of uncommitted. Some people are saying that you could also just write in Gaza. So we'll be talking about that more and more and more so that people can have their options together. But in the next hour, we'll talk more about that. Well, in this hour, we'll talk more about that. But we'll also be talking with Jim Narakis from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting about how this campaign is being reported, who's being discussed, who's not being discussed, how are they being discussed, and what should you be looking out for as a consumer of the news. And if something is objectionable to you, do you have the right to complain? How do you complain? It's a bit of a media education that we're going to be doing today. And as we talk about Nikki Haley, who has left the presidential race, well, certainly she has suspended the campaign, which allows you to not be in it completely, but you have control over your money and things like that. But she has not endorsed former President Trump. She has not done that. So what is that about? I've got a lot to talk about. In the next hour, we'll be talking about Kamala Harris. Do you remember this song by Betty Wright called The Cleanup Woman? Well, it seems like that is what Kamala Harris is getting. I mean, my goodness, she got the border. That was her assignment. Who wants that assignment? And now she's got ceasefire, but she's taking this argument to Black congregations and Black events, Black colleges, to Selma. How's that going to work? As more and more, the White House is trying to shield President Biden from large crowds, because wherever he goes with large crowds, he's meeting demonstrators, he's meeting dissenters, protesters. So now they're trying to hire a private firm, the White House is, to vet people who will be in the audience. You cannot make this up, Jim Narakis. I mean, this is just crazy. Wow. And so controlled. But before we do that, you have the Democratic convention that will be coming here in the fall. Almost in the fall, late in the summer, in August of 2024. Many people are saying this might be the most engaged or engaging convention that we have seen since Chicago was the host of the convention in 1968, because people are wanting to express themselves, to express how they feel about Gaza, how they feel about inflation, how they feel about where the society is right now. So, but Gaza is on our minds. 30,000 people have been killed, and the numbers keep adding up. We're hearing about not just the sexual abuse and rapes of women that are being documented by the UN. Remember, the New York Times tried to document that about the Israeli hostages, and that was actually found to be untrue. Well, not so with the Palestinian women. And now we're seeing that the UN is concerned about the physical abuse of children in Gaza, because so many of them are being arrested. And so there's a group of young Jewish activists and young Jewish people who care, who are saying, not in my name. If not now, Chicago, I have given them a platform here because I think that they deserve it. I think that they need it. Anyone who's fighting for peace and justice, you have a home here on the Santita Jackson Show. So Daniel Epstein from the University of Chicago. That's right. I grew up on that campus, and great things come from the UC. My father went there to graduate school, and so did my brother Jesse. As a matter of fact, former Congressman Jackson. Talk to us about what, if not now, is up to at the moment, at present. You're going to have a vigil, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, If Not Now is joining with a broad and diverse coalition of groups around Chicago, including other Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and Tzedek Chicago, Jewish Fast for Gaza, also Palestinian groups like USPCN, AMP, and other anti-war and anti-racist groups. We think it's the one of the broadest and most diverse anti-war coalitions brought together since October 7th. And we're going to be holding a vigil tomorrow into Friday, a 24-hour vigil for the victims of the genocide in Gaza. We think it's really important to come together to mourn and also express our rage at this administration, which is enabling their deaths.
So this vigil will take place where?
Yeah.
And for how long? And how can people be a part? Can people support?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this vigil will be taking place tomorrow. We're going to start at 8 a.m. In Federal Plaza downtown. Federal Plaza, of course, is adjacent to the offices of our senators, Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, who, we're extending this call to do what the majority of Americans, certainly the majority of their voters want, which is to end this, do what they can to end this genocide, support a lasting ceasefire, and bring this nightmare to an end. And so people should come out. We're going to be there beginning at 8 tomorrow until 8 the next day. We'll be reading names. We'll be hearing from speakers. And we'll also be, tomorrow night is the State of the Union, right? A lot of your listeners are probably thinking of watching. We encourage people to join us for the State of the Union. We'll be hoping to stage something of a kind of alternative, and share the stories which we don't think Biden will talk about, and the State of the Union that he'll ignore, which is the state of the genocide.
Well, before you go, Daniel Epstein, if not now, Chicago, why are you having this now? We're just a few days away from Ramadan. This is just is that a coincidence? We're looking at the State of the Union. We're in the middle of what has been the primary season, but for all intents and purposes, it seems like it's kind of sort of, I'm not going to say over, but certainly it's in another place because at least the two major parties have their nominees. What do you want President Biden and former President Trump to hear?
Well, I think, we chose this date because we know that the State of the Union in an election year, right, is where President Biden is going to be sort of making his kind of opening case, or at least the kind of opening case of the kind of business end of the campaign now that the sort of nominations are in place. But we know he's not going to, we don't expect him to acknowledge the gravity of the pain and suffering that his administration has caused in Gaza, and that, we and the other members of our coalition have been, pretty openly, telling him for months and months and months. And so, on the date of the State of the Union, on the 5-month anniversary of October 7th, leading also into International Women's Day on the 8th, and we can talk about, the particular impact of the genocide in Gaza on women and girls. We thought this was an important occasion to come together, to mourn, and also to be clear about the state of the genocide which is going on. And which will be certainly, obscured and ignored in the hour that Biden will be speaking tomorrow night.
So, I mean, it's very interesting, Jim DeRay, because we don't really hear about, and Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, National Leadership Team of Rainbow Push, of course, the senior pastor of the iconic Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Your immediate predecessor was the senator from the great state of Georgia, Reverend Dr. Senator Warnock now. But, ecclesiastical titles eclipse all others, so he'll always be Reverend Warnock to us. Jim, when you hear about what Daniel and If Not Now are doing, is corporate media turning a blind eye to them, or am I missing something here?
I think one of the striking things about the way that the domestic reaction to the Gaza assault has been covered is the insistence on confusing Jewish and pro-Israel. These are treated as synonymous in most of corporate media in the United States, and some of the strongest activism against what's going on in Gaza has been led by Jewish Americans. And so to talk about to conflate people criticizing the genocide in Gaza with anti-Semitism is just, I think, a complete misrepresentation of who is actually speaking out against what's going on there. And so I think it's very important what groups like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. The name If Not Now refers to the famous quote from Hillel. I think it's striking to think of Hillel being used as a figurehead for pro-Israel propaganda when I can't say what a 2,000-year-old person is, what his political position would be, but it seems very unlikely that he would be. But given his stated philosophy, it seems very unlikely that he'd be an enthusiastic supporter of massive bloodshed in the name of Judaism.
Reverend Dr. Yeary, before Daniel Epstein goes, would you like to say anything?
Well, I think, one, the effort to draw continued attention to the unresolved matters in Gaza is really important now that we have some precision in understanding who the two lead competitors are going to be in the upcoming presidential election. Now's the time to get very intentional about policy, what is the agenda, and how to make sure we don't get pitted against one another in terms of whose issues going to take prominence or preeminence as the presidential candidates start speaking to the needs and the desires of the folks that they will want to vote for them. And so I think it's really important now to put it on both of their agenda. Clearly, neither of them has an acceptable answer. One just says, if I had been president, this wouldn't be happening, which I think is a farce in and of itself. But that won't be the reality that either of them will inherit. One is in it now, wants to stay in it. One wants to return and then take it over. Neither of them has given an adequate response to what the response needs to be to address not only the plight of the innocent, but also the resolution of the ongoing conflict. And until those matters are put front and center, the rest of us in this moment, when we ask the question, if not now, the follow-up question we often remember, if not us, who? And so that's really the prominent thing that we all have to keep in mind as we continue to raise these important human rights justice issues around the world.
Where will you be? And what is it, tomorrow through Friday?
Yeah. Tomorrow through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. At Federal Plaza. And we encourage you all to come out and support for however long makes sense for you. And also, especially, join us for the State of the Union and hear something other than what you'll be hearing on TV.
That's important.
Yeah.
You'll be giving your own response. Well, you know what? you'll have to come back and tell us what your response to the State of the Union is. I think that's important for us to hear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Daniel, it's a joy to be with you today, and thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you know you're home here on the Santita Jackson
All
Show. Sending you much love.
right.
Absolutely. Jim Narakis, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. You know, I depend upon you to help us to navigate this media landscape fairly. I mean, because you really call balls and strikes. And that's one of the things that I love about Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. You and Janine Jackson have done such brilliant work down through the years. And I've met so many great thinkers from you. We're going to have Bryce Green on in the next hour.
Oh, excellent.
For example. And just so you give people, Reverend Dr. Uri and Reverend Dr. Uri, you should write to them too, a platform to really step back and look at what we're looking at, so that we can understand just what we see. And you also help us to understand how we as consumers of the news, what we can do in response to something that we know to be untrue, or if something is offensive. And so I appreciate the media education. I appreciate all that you're doing. It's a very, very interesting political season that we're in. Of course, Nikki Haley has decided to suspend her campaign. In the meantime, Robert Kennedy Jr. is getting on more and more ballots across the country. So that's interesting. We're not hearing about Dr. Cornel West, but whenever people hear him, they get excited. So I need you to step back and help me to understand what we're looking at, because now when I look at corporate media, Reverend Dr. Uri, all I'm hearing is that now there are two, Trump and Biden. But we know that with an electorate that has the plurality is the majority, actually. 27% Republican, 27% Democrat, according to Gallup, but 44% in the middle say, don't identify me with either party. That's who we are. So how there are two when in America there are three, that math is not adding up to me. What are we looking at? Are there only two?
Well, I feel like there is a great stress in the political press corps on keeping things to the expected and traditional. One of the big blunders of media in recent years was the failure to see Trump coming, because Trump was someone who got the nomination not because of support from the party, but despite opposition in the party, and that there was almost a universal assumption in the political press corps that doesn't happen, and they certainly are not eager to let that happen. So the fact that that Biden is cruising to renomination without much in the way of challenge, that is the way that the press corps wants things to go. They do not like surprises. They don't like people who shake things up. And I think it has a lot to do with why we're ending up with two candidates in this election, two major party candidates, who are both of them quite unpopular. There's not a lot of enthusiasm in the general electorate for either one of them, and yet that is very likely, much more likely after yesterday, going to be the main choices that will be on the ballot in November. And I think that it's worthwhile to step back and say, what kind of press corps, what kind of media system would allow for more voices to be taking part in the conversation, more faces, different faces than the ones we've seen, being offered a chance to lay out new visions of where the country could go, new solutions for the many problems we have. I feel like the corporations that own our media are really not just not helping that happen, but are opposed to that happening. I think that's really the last thing that they want, is to have people who are bent on shaking up a system that has worked very well for them.
But in the meantime, people's voices are not getting heard, and it's like they're not interested in hearing people's voices. I mean, the corporate media, the Supreme Court, Congress, the executive branch, they're more mistrusted and distrusted than ever before. But let's look at the media. I mean, and Reverend Dr. Yuri, you can jump in on this too. People don't trust the media. When I talk to people now, particularly to young people, they don't get their information from NBC, ABC, CBS. We don't gather and watch Walter Cronkite anymore. I don't even know who anchors the news anymore, because I'm not really watching that. People are going to TikTok, they're going to X, they're going to Instagram, they're going to Facebook, they're going to other sources because they don't trust that news source. I mean, is that dangerous? Or is that an evolution? Help me with that. A devolution, evolution, what is it?
I actually think that that social media had a promise of enabling more horizontal communication from people to people, and less of a top down delivery of information from on high. And the social media companies have really shied away from that. Facebook has made it very difficult to share information on its website. You see people now no longer putting links in their posts, because if you put a link in their post, Facebook is not going to show it to nearly as many people. People hide the link in the comments in hopes that someone might see it, which is kind of ironic. Twitter has been taken over by a avowed white supremacist, and is become more of a delivery vehicle for far right propaganda. The TikTok, I think, is one of the few outlets that has not tried to make it more difficult for people to share information, because as a non-U.S. owned corporation, they don't have the same, they're not worried about being brought before Congress like Mark Zuckerberg is, and so they have not throttled people as much sharing information, which I think has as much to do. There's quite a bit of anti-TikTok sentiment in the political class, and I think it has as much to do. The ostensible reason is because it's owned by China, by a Chinese corporation. But I think that it's really the not so much that it's China, but that it's outside of U.S. control that makes people nervous about it.
Do you think that we've gotten, have we gotten good reporting of the issues and of the candidates in 2024, particularly, in the presidential race?
Well, I think that the race itself has gotten, I think, relatively subdued coverage because the press corps, their main way of addressing politics is the horse race: who's up, who's down. And horse race wise, this has been a pretty boring election. It looked like, way back at the beginning, it looked like it was going to be Trump and Biden. And it is always the case that who looks like it's going to be the nominee ends up being the nominee. But in this case, it sure looks like who is expected to be the nominee will be the nominee. There haven't been a lot of ups and downs or reversals, and so the drama that they like to milk out of the primary season is not happening. So there's not a lot of enthusiasm, I think, on the part of corporate media outlets for this race. But I think if you step back, you see that the media have a tremendous role in setting the stage for the campaign. I think back to the 2020 election, which was dominated by fears of crime. And it was really a entirely hyped up crime wave. You know, the crime in 2020 by historical standards was quite low. There was not some massive murder wave going on, but you know, there's certainly enough murders that happen to fill up every front page, and so the media chose to make a crime wave that the 2020 election was largely about, and that's why we have a Republican Congress now, is because they rode in on a hyped up crime spree that was basically invented by the media. And I think in 2024, sorry, I was reading 2022, not 2020. In 2024, immigration is playing that role, and we have this border crisis going on. And by border crisis, the media mean that people are trying to come to the United States, and that's a crisis. And if you look at the rate of migration, net migration to the United States has been falling since 1998. In 1998, the number of people coming to the United States compared to the number of people leaving the United States was well over twice as high as it is today. There's been first a sharp drop, and then a more, throughout the 21st century, a more gradual drop. And I think that would surprise most people who are following the news closely. I think they'd be surprised to learn that we are not in some kind of tidal wave of immigration, but actually, in terms of recent history, a relatively low level of immigration. But you see the headlines again and again of the border crisis that Biden has to address, and they tout the number of apprehensions by the Border Patrol is what the media use as the gauge of how much immigration there is. And so the more enforcement that Biden invests in on the border, the higher that number is, and the more, and so the border crisis by the media's presentation is even worse. And it's really a kind of a catch-22 for the administration, and it was not something that we saw going on during the Trump administration. So Trump didn't have to deal with this drumbeat from the media of all these people crossing the border, which is, by the way, always presented as a negative thing. Which, if you poll people, a lot of people are happy to see immigration. There's a lot of people who are pro-immigration in the United States, but it's treated like it's the cancer rate. Like the more immigrants, that shows that things are bad. And for the people who are most directly involved, the migrants, they are in many cases fleeing from political violence, much of which has been exacerbated by U.S. policy, from economic crises, which in some cases are deliberately created by the United States. In countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua, the policy of the United States government is to wreck the economies of these countries. And so people come and, so to treat it as though this is an unalloyed bad thing that Biden is not doing enough to stop is really kind of perverse, I think.
Well, I feel like the two candidates were chosen for us as well. I mean, just Reverend Dr. Uri, what are you seeing? I mean, and what are you hearing? You're in Baltimore, but you're also around the country. I mean, is the media doing a good job with all of this? I mean, because the media let Biden. He was not a good candidate 4 years ago. I think we can all agree on that. And wasn't a good candidate in the 80s, and people were asking him to leave. But the media kind of kept him in the mix by allowing him to, when he kept saying, when I get to South Carolina, no one ever asked him what's going to happen in South Carolina. He just, I don't know. Help me. What are we seeing in this election cycle? Because there's a lot going on, and you have other people running. It's not just Biden and Trump. You have RFK Jr., who's gathering steam. He's polling in the 20s in many polls. You've got Dr. Cornel West. These people are factors. Reverend Dr. Urey, or am I misreading that?
Well, let me start with the classic close from a bygone era, and that's the way it is. Then you'd be given the date and the sign off by Walter Cronkite. The truth of the matter is that news programs are no longer about news; they're about entertainment. It is not about accuracy in the reporting. It's about holding a particular share of viewers that gets translated in some algorithm to a value proposition for advertisers and others to be able to reach people with products. So it's part of the consumption formula. And so what are we presenting for folks to consume? It depends on what their appetite is. And so if you don't like one media restaurant, you can flip the channel to another one. If you're feeling pasta one day or seafood another day, pick your flavor du jour and you'll probably find something. The challenge is this framework, right? I think we all think nostalgically of a time when news was more about being accurate, and if it was profitable, that would be okay too. Now it is media profitable, and if it's accurate, then that'll be okay too. But if it's not, we're not really going to worry about it because we're less concerned about public interest and we're really driven by shareholder interest because these are corporate entities. And so there's a bottom line factor. And so when we start looking at content, then we have to dig a little deeper, peel the onion back and ask, who's doing the interpretation of the analysis? And if you look at who the talking heads are and what their relationships are and who they're connected to, you're going to get a particular brand of analysis that is just consistent with whatever the top line expectation is going to be. It's not a shock that whether you're looking at Fox or MSNBC, CNN's trying to go through some curious kind of repositioning, not really clear on where they're going to fall. But I think the other part is mentioning CNN, is we've taken news from being a highlight of the day to being intoxicated and addicted to it all day, every day. There was a time when you got the morning paper, and then when you got off work, you might get the evening edition to see what you missed while you were at work. Now it is, you mentioned you don't know who the anchors of the news are anymore. Well, it depends on when you're watching because there's a different anchor at different times of the day. And so we have now this overwhelming presence of an abundance of just stuff coming from all different directions. And it may or may not be connected to either my needs or what we would call reality in general. And so is the media doing a good job? The classic answer to that in law school when you're presented a question is it depends. Who are we including? Who are we excluding? And who are we specifically talking about? Some media outlets do a fantastic job. The problem is they're driven by accuracy, not profitability. And because you're driven by accuracy, folks aren't interested in accuracy. That's why you still have 2/3 of registered Republicans still thinking that the 2020 election was stolen, right? It's not about accuracy. It's about whatever is in synergy with what my view of reality is. So that's one. But the other part is, and I was listening to Jim kind of walk back through the history. He mentioned 2022. Well, remember 2020, the big fear was, we were in the throes of a pandemic. That was the dominant thing. That was the controlling narrative. How are you handling this rising death crisis. And then you had this kind of dysfunctional behavior off to the side where you saw these, interesting outbursts from the now former president that kind of got engaged. Then if you go to 2016, that's where you saw a bit of the tough on crime kind of language after the Obama years. And that ended up being kind of playing into a tape that we saw going back to the Willie Horton days, right, in that presidential election. And so there, because elections, here's where I kind of land on this. Elections more recently have been more emotional than rational. This is not about what's reasonable. What are my needs? It's who's going to hit that particular thing that gets my response. And it doesn't necessarily have to be true. It just has to have meaning for me. And now you're at the place where you've got the two oldest candidates you could find to run against each other at the same time. One calling the other one older. He looks more frail, but they're kind of in the same demographic. And to your point, Santita, there are others who are more viable, more reasonable, more credible, who can't get a window of opportunity because at the end of the day, politics is like media. It's profit driven.
Well,
and so these are the most...
Reverend Dr. Yuri, to interrupt, we were told in 2020 that 2024 was going to happen, Jim Narakis and Reverend Dr. Yuri, that we were going to have a replay because Trump was not going to leave and he's going to run against Biden again. Just you see. And it's almost as if all of this has been predetermined.
It's like a good sitcom. After you produce it the first time, you run it over and over and over again in a loop. And here's the scary part, is that if the replay goes the way the former president wants it to go, you're going to have to look at that rerun a few times because he practiced one time not leaving. I think he's perfected it this time and is playing it out to such a degree that everything that he did as a misstep the last time, he's going to be very careful not to repeat it. And that's the scary part. In the midst of all of this haranguing over who can be a part of the wider political discourse, and it's contaminating, quite honestly, and polluting our ability to see clearly what are our moral obligations when we have the conversations about what's going on in Gaza. You've heard really neither of them speak clearly as to what's going to be your foreign policy position on issues, other than the fact that one is saying, well, we need a pause, we need a humanitarian pause. And then, he can't really find his courage to say what's going on. And the other is saying,
then, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth on that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look.
But no one's calling him out, right? I mean, that is what's...
there are some calling them out. The problem is which platforms do they have access to call them out?
That's my point. I mean, you can't get on the big platforms if you.
But here's where we've got to be more creative with our strategy. We cannot allow ourselves to be so dependent on the big platforms to get our message out. We've got to be counterinsurgent in our communications methods. Otherwise, we leave ourselves dependent to whatever the media moguls decide they want to give us access to. And so when we talk about the courageous media outlets like fairness and accuracy in reporting, those venues that are going to be on social media, those venues that are going to be in community meetings, those venues that are going to be part of the network of the hodgepodge of community newsletters, whatever it is, we've got to leverage those, because the truth of the matter is what we would have to do to appease the major media, the corporate media, just to be able to get access would be the equivalent of selling our soul. And there's been enough soul selling to the harm of the rest of the nation and even the world. And so what we have to do is we have to be insistent, we have to be consistent, but most of all, we've got to be persistent in making sure that we're going to have the credible conversations come what may. And if it means then that we have to avoid the big stage or the more profitable stage, then so be it.
Well, Jim Narakis, I agree with that. I mean, and so what would you advise the consumers of the news, all of us, to do at this time? How do we, because many of the people are working from sun up to sundown, they're exhausted. They don't sit on top of the news like we do.
Yeah,
I called you here. I mean, but you do want the truth. And I was shocked when I went to South Carolina in 2020, what people did not know about the candidates and their backgrounds.
I always get a kick when you see reports in corporate media talking about what people don't know and acting like this is a poor reflection on people, when really it's a poor reflection on media. You know, we have an institution in our society that is supposed to inform people, and they fail at their job. They don't take it seriously, and the result is a largely uninformed electorate. And to a certain extent, that is, I don't want to say intentional, but there are for the corporations that own the media, for the corporations whose advertisements fund the corporate media, a well-informed public is a dangerous thing. It is not necessarily what you're looking for, and you are you see a lot of focus in corporate media on what are called culture war issues. And these are, I don't want to trivialize these. These are important things that affect real people's lives. But what they largely are is things that don't affect the corporate bottom line. And so it's much safer to have conversations about those things than it is to talk about who gets the biggest slice of the economic pie, and who is left with an empty plate. I think that along with immigration, one of the issues that media have made into overwhelming liability for Biden is the issue of inflation, which we've seen, just overwhelming coverage of this. And if you contrast, like we've done counts of like how much the media are talking about inflation versus how much they're talking about jobs. The jobs are is an issue that looks much better for Biden. The way that employment has come back from the COVID recession is really pretty remarkable, and the fact that inflation has come down without unemployment going up, which is considered like the standard economic conventional wisdom that you have to throw people out of work to get rid of inflation, didn't seem to happen in this case. But you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist. The people who own the media are people who have a lot of money, and so inflation affects them directly. Their money, inflation means that money is worth less, and so from a corporate point of view, from the point of view of the wealthy who have a lot of money, it's not a good thing. No billionaire is worried about losing their job. That's not an issue that concerns them. So the unemployment rate is not a number that weighs heavily on their mind. They're not like studying the charts to see if they're going to have work next month. That's a concern that poor people have. That's not a concern that the wealthy have. And so it's not something that there's billionaires who own the media, and then there's millionaires who run the media for them. That's the basic model of our media system, and explains a lot of why media don't do a good job for people who are neither millionaires or billionaires. Well,
do people have any power here, Jim?
Well, I think that we need to be building media power. In terms of what people can do, I would seek out a diverse range of media. I look out for media that are addressing the issues that you think are important. Pay attention to whether they're giving you credible information, whether they're getting the story right in a way that you can check, and learn to rely on media that are doing a good job of talking about stories that you need in a way that you can trust. And if you can, support those institutions, because many of them are not owned by billionaires. They're struggling nonprofits often, who are trying to keep the lights on, and your check for $20 or $50 can make a great deal of difference to those organizations. And I think we need to share this information with each other, to let our friends know what we found, where we're getting the good information that we need. As I said before, the social media companies are making it much more difficult to do that, and that's not an accident. That's on purpose. They don't want their platforms to be a way for people to share information, because it on the most basic level, it can get them in trouble, and that would interfere with the money press that they have running. They think that not rocking the boat for the powerful people who can make regulatory decisions about their companies is the most important thing, to make sure that the money flow stays on. There are efforts to try to create an alternative social media system, and it's not, sometimes it can be a little clunky. The probably the most prominent of these projects is called Mastodon, and it's an attempt to create basically a Twitter alternative, and it's based on the idea of federation. It's not one platform; it's a bunch of different platforms that are sharing the products of the people who use them, and I think ultimately that system where your content is not a product that a corporation is selling, but something that belongs to you, that you can share through a cooperative network. I think that is the model for information that can get us through this.
Well, certainly I only have about 2 or 3 minutes left here, Reverend Dr. Yuri. I mean, you have one of the greatest and one of the most respected platforms that exists, the Black Church, and you're one of the most prominent. You're one of the most prominent congregations, and indeed, that's how Reverend Jackson made his bones. He went from church to church, big and small, and he's just been relentless in getting the information out there. Is that what you mean by utilizing our own portals, our own networks, to get truth out there, to get information to people? Reverend Dr. Yuri?
That's spot on, right? That's exactly it. But it's also in the exchange of perspectives and ideas that we get to this somewhat mysterious place called understanding, right? It's not that somebody necessarily is doing the interpretation for us, right? It's like we're being fed. It's like, a hammer on a nail. You're going to keep hammering it until it gets in the place where you want it. That's the way the media comes at us now. And anything that doesn't fit within the aim of the head of the hammer is excluded, right? We see it in some of the cases going before the Supreme Court. And it's a very tricky argument that's being argued in the social media, where Florida and Texas have said that social media companies can't filter anything. And on the flip side, the social media companies say, well, we're talking about, news and accuracy. And then you think about how editorializing is subject to the discretion of the publisher. You're not given carte blanche or an absolute right to have your editorial published. So where else are you going to really have authentic dialogue that facilitates credibility and understanding if you don't do it face-to-face, person-to-person? That's why the community association, better known as the church, as far as the Black church tradition, I would argue is the case. That's why when the Black pastors came together and took out the ad in the New York Times about the president's stance on Gaza, it got his attention, because you can't count click-throughs on Sunday morning attendance. You got to be in the place to be able to see who I'm talking to. So when we start talking about mass mobilizing, that's what makes movements. It's not social media. It's not necessarily a news clip. It is definitely not a soundbite, but it's when you create the mechanisms by which accurate information reaches authentic relationship. Now you have exactly what Jim is saying, that the government don't want, the corporations don't want. You don't want the people empowered, because once they figure out this is a math problem, the oligarchy is at risk, and therefore the people are going to decide they are tired of being the gum on the bottom of their shoe.
Jim Narakis, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. Everybody go to fair.org, fair.org. They need and they deserve your support. When I need to get some guidance, Reverend Dr. Yuri, on what I'm seeing in the news, I always reference FAIR. I read them. I go to their website every day, and I go into the archives because Media Watch, magazine, all of that, I need to know. I mean, and particularly in my position, but I think that we all have an obligation to know. And thank you for all the work that you and Janine Jackson do, Jim Narakis, because you all do it for quite some time. Coming up, let us talk about Vice President Kamala Harris. Is she the cleanup woman? Boy, she's been given some nasty details. Oh yeah, I'm going Betty Wright. You know it. Don't just be quiet. Bump, 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 bump. You know where I am on that. We all grew up with that song. I mean, she got the migrant crisis. Now they're sending her on the Black tour to talk about ceasefire. Something that the president still equivocates on. Got to talk about that on the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a minute. Jim